thing that happened is Tupac's family is reportedly deciding to investigate the rumors that Diddy was involved in Tupac's.
We are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward.
The courtroom was a pressure cooker of tension, every seat filled with reporters, legal teams, and spectators who had come to witness what was already being called the trial of the decade. The atmosphere was electric, each new piece of evidence peeling back the layers of a life lived in the shadows of wealth, power, and controversy. And then it happened, the moment that would define the day's proceedings. The grainy security footage flickered onto the screen, and the collective gasp that followed was deafening. There it was, a figure cloaked in black, their face obscured by a mask, moving with calculated precision through the driveway of Kim Porter's home. The timestamp on the footage only deepened the intrigue, placing this ominous intruder mere hours before Porter was found unresponsive in her bedroom in 2018. This wasn't just evidence, it was a narrative bombshell waiting to explode.
Man, this timeline is crazy, man.
I know. So many things coming at one time.
Though the masked figure slipped into a waiting car, the vehicle's license plate unreadable in the dim light, leaving behind more questions than answers. Who was this person? What were they doing there? And why had this footage, reportedly buried in legal limbo for years, suddenly surfaced now? For those in the courtroom, it was impossible to ignore the implications. This wasn't just about an intruder. It was about a timeline, a motive, and a growing sense that Kim Porter's passing was far from the natural tragedy it had been initially declared. And for Sean Diddy Combs, the man whose name had been tied to Porter for over a decade, the timing of these revelations couldn't have been worse.
U.S. Attorney, what you want you want the best attorneys you can have in there, and it really, I know you want to, like we said, appearances matter, but you want to win this case, and you need, like you said, it's harder for them.
Kim Porter's demise had always been a subject of quiet speculation within Hollywood's inner circles. Officially, it was attributed to pneumonia, a sudden and tragic loss that left her children, family, and fans devastated. But whispers of foul play had persisted, fueled by her close ties to Diddy and the alleged secrets she had been preparing to reveal in a memoir. That memoir, reportedly titled Kim's Lost Words, A Journey for Justice, From the Other Side, had been briefly available for sale online before vanishing without explanation. Now, with new testimonies and evidence emerging, the long-buried suspicions were gaining traction. Courtney Burgess, a former confidant of Diddy, had testified that Porter had handed him flash drives containing damning footage and manuscripts just weeks before her demise. According to Burgess, she had expressed fears for her safety and a desire to protect her children from the fallout of her revelation.
You know what I'm saying? Just with this Cassie thing, I didn't know her, but I knew somebody like her, and that was Kim Porter. I didn't know Cassie, but I knew somebody who was going through the same thing she was going through, and that was Kim Porter.
The contents of those flash drives, Burgess claimed, were nothing short of explosive. In his grand jury testimony, he described hours of footage from Diddy's infamous parties, events that had long been rumored to blur the lines between opulence and exploitation. The tapes allegedly featured several A-list celebrities, some of them underage at the time, engaging in activities that were, at best, morally questionable and, at worst, criminal. Burgess described hidden cameras, embedded in picture frames, bathroom mirrors, and even light fixtures, capturing moments that the attendees likely believed were private. These weren't just parties, Burgess suggested. They were orchestrated events designed to entrap and control. But it wasn't just the tapes that painted a disturbing picture. Burgess also referenced Porter's unpublished memoir, which he described as a scathing indictment of her years with Diddy. The manuscript reportedly detailed a pattern of emotional manipulation, financial control, and veiled threats that kept Porter tethered to Diddy even as their romantic relationship unraveled. More chillingly, Porter had allegedly written about her growing fear that she was being watched, her phone tapped, and her movements monitored. These claims echoed earlier allegations made by Mark Curry, a former Bad Boy artist, who had publicly accused Diddy of wiretapping Porter's phone and using surveillance to control those around him.
Because Kim had took the cork, you know where you open up wine? The corkscrew. She took the corkscrew and caught him on his wrist defending himself, and he almost, I know he tore some ligament, but he almost hit an artery. I came close to the artery, or either scratched it or cut it a little bit because he just kept bleeding.
The courtroom wasn't just grappling with the revelations about Porter. It was also reeling from the broader implications of the evidence presented. Cassie, Diddy's former partner, had emerged as a key figure in the case, her own allegations adding weight to the claims against him. In recently unsealed court documents, Cassie described years of coercion and abuse, detailing how she was allegedly isolated from her support network and subjected to a toxic cycle of control. She had reportedly provided investigators with recordings, emails, and text messages that corroborated her claims, including one chilling message, where Diddy allegedly threatened to ruin her life if she ever spoke out.
But she was only on the stand for about 30 minutes, and the big takeaway is this story that she tells regarding the email she got from her daughter in December of 2011. This is where Cassie Ventura writes her mother and another person explaining or expressing that Sean Puffy Combs, she said, threatened to put out explicit videos of her. Again, this is around the holiday time, and also saying that he would do something to the person that she was.
The legal team representing Cassie had also pointed to a pattern of behavior that extended beyond her own experiences. They brought up testimonies from former employees, bodyguards, and artists signed to Bad Boy Records, all of whom described a culture of fear and silence. One former employee testified that Diddy had a habit of requiring guests at his parties to sign non-disclosure agreements before entering his home, a practice that now seemed less about protecting privacy and more about concealing potential crimes. Another witness recounted an incident where a female guest was allegedly escorted out of one of Diddy's events after refusing to drink from a pre-poured glass, a detail that took on new significance in light of allegations about spiked beverages and compromised consent. As the courtroom delved deeper into the allegations, attention turned to the federal raids conducted on Diddy's properties earlier that year. Agents had reportedly seized a trove of items, including surveillance equipment, guest lists, and what one investigator described as meticulously detailed records of party attendees. Among the seized items were hard drives containing hours of video footage, which prosecutors argued provided a window into a world of excess and exploitation. Legal experts noted that the inclusion of these materials could be a game changer, potentially linking Diddy to a pattern of behavior that spanned decades.
In her civil lawsuit, Cassie said that she was the victim of abuse, assault, and at the hands of Diddy.
And yet, even as the walls seemed to close in, Diddy's defense team remained unflinching. They dismissed the allegations as baseless, arguing that the testimonies were motivated by financial gain and personal vendettas. They questioned the credibility of witnesses like Burgess, pointing to inconsistencies in his statements and his lack of direct ties to the alleged crimes. But for many in the courtroom, the sheer weight of the evidence, from the tapes to the testimonies to the mysterious circumstances surrounding Porter's demise, was impossible to ignore. The day's proceedings ended with a palpable sense of unease, the kind that lingers long after the final gavel falls. The revelations had been shocking, but they felt like just the tip of the iceberg. What other secrets were hidden in those flash drives? Who else might come forward to testify? And most importantly, how far would Diddy's team go to keep the rest of the story from coming to light? The answers, it seemed, were still out there, waiting to be uncovered in the days and weeks to come.
You know, I suppose it could be coincidence. I don't think it's coincidence, and especially given the nature of the case.
Yes.
Because when you look at who is examining these various witnesses, you know, especially female alleged victims, of which there will be 4.
And just when it seemed the revelations couldn't get any darker, the courtroom descended further into chaos as new layers of the scandal began to surface. The focus shifted to the connections, those intricate tangled webs of relationships, favors, and secrets that had allegedly built Sean Diddy Combs' empire. What emerged wasn't just a story about one man's alleged abuses of power, but an entire ecosystem of enablers, collaborators, and complicit silence. The question wasn't just how far Diddy's influence reached. It was how many people had been caught in his gravitational pull, and how many lives were now left shattered in its wake. The details were staggering. Testimony after testimony painted a picture of a man who didn't just thrive on control, but weaponized it. One former employee described being tasked with organizing Diddy's infamous gatherings, where guest lists weren't just curated, they were meticulously engineered. These weren't social events, they were power plays, designed to bring together individuals who could be used, manipulated, or silenced. Attendees were allegedly categorized by their usefulness: rising stars who could be exploited, industry gatekeepers who needed to be kept in line, and, chillingly, those who had already fallen out of favor and were there as a warning to others. Everything, down to the seating arrangements, was reportedly planned to reinforce Diddy's dominance.
We are not done, and that Combs did not do this alone. Do you foresee that there could be other charges related to this case?
I'm not taking anything off the table.
And then there were the recordings. The FBI had been tight-lipped about what they found during the raids on Diddy's properties, but leaks from law enforcement sources hinted at the scope of what had been uncovered. Among the materials seized were audio files, hours of conversations that allegedly revealed the behind-the-scenes machinations of a man determined to protect his empire at all costs. In one recording, Diddy reportedly boasted about his ability to make problems disappear, a phrase that sent chills through the courtroom when it was read aloud by the prosecution. The implications were clear. This wasn't just a man with power. This was a man who allegedly wielded it with ruthless precision. But the most explosive revelations weren't just about control. They were about betrayal. Witnesses came forward to describe how Diddy had allegedly turned on those closest to him, leveraging their loyalty against them. One former bodyguard claimed that he had been instructed to gather compromising information on Diddy's associates, including his own friends and family members. These files, kept in a secure digital archive, were reportedly used as leverage to ensure silence and obedience. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Former friends and collaborators described feeling trapped, knowing that any misstep could result in their private lives being exposed or their careers destroyed.
Prosecution, I believe, was trying to show that level of control that they talked about at the very beginning of this case. And then to see that her family talks about being intimidated and fearing for Cassie's safety. And that's why they sent the money, they said, because they were really concerned. We also learned that the mother's the one who said, you know what, I want to take pictures of this abuse. Again, the mom said she did not know about that.
Even more unsettling were the allegations surrounding how Diddy maintained his power within the entertainment industry. Several witnesses detailed a pattern of strategic alliances, where favors were traded and debts were called in at opportune moments. These weren't just business transactions, they were acts of coercion, designed to keep people in line. One music executive testified that Diddy had once threatened to blacklist him from the industry if he didn't comply with a specific demand. The executive described the experience as terrifying, adding that he had no choice but to comply, knowing that Diddy's influence could destroy his livelihood with a single phone call.
When it came to the explicit videos, the prosecution asked her, what was your reaction to hearing that your daughter said she was concerned about those explicit videos? When it came to this idea that Cassie was saying, you know, Mom, Sean Combs is threatening to put out explicit videos of me, she said her reaction to that was she was physically sick and that she said, quote, the tapes through me.
What made this testimony even more damning was the discovery of corroborating evidence in the form of internal emails obtained by prosecutors. The emails, dated from 2015, showed correspondence between Diddy and his legal team, discussing contingency plans for industry figures who might not play ball. In one email, a list of names was attached with notes detailing each individual's vulnerabilities, financial troubles, personal scandals, or unfulfilled contractual obligations. Investigators argued that this was more than just a strategy document. It was a blueprint for coercion, outlining exactly how to apply pressure when needed. The executive in question identified himself on that list with a note beside his name reading, "Has no options, will fold under pressure." But it wasn't just the executives and collaborators who felt the weight of Diddy's power. Several up-and-coming artists testified that they had been drawn to his label with promises of mentorship, only to find themselves trapped in contracts that offered little financial reward and even less creative freedom. One artist described how her promising career was derailed after she refused to attend a private meeting with Diddy, an incident she claimed was followed by anonymous threats and sudden cancellations of her booked performances. These stories highlighted a pattern that seemed to stretch back decades, where dreams were dangled as bait, only to be used as leverage in a game few understood until it was too late.
It is a big part of the case in reference to this notion that she was forced into it. And remember, the criminal enterprise and the racketeering, according to that indictment, is about him using force and threats and arson and all of these things they said for his desires. So that's why I think a lot of what we're hearing are these details.
And yet, despite the growing mountain of allegations, there were still those who defended him. High-profile figures within the music and entertainment industries began to close ranks, issuing statements of support and dismissing the claims as baseless. But even these gestures of loyalty came under scrutiny. Investigators revealed that several of Diddy's most vocal supporters had financial ties to his businesses, raising questions about whether their loyalty was genuine or simply bought. The optics were damning, and it became increasingly clear that this was about more than just one man. It was about an entire system of power and privilege that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. As the prosecution continued to build its case, attention turned to the financial records that had been seized during the raids. These documents, described by one investigator as meticulous to the point of paranoia, provided a detailed account of Diddy's expenditures over the past 2 decades. Among the more mundane entries, luxury cars, private jets, and extravagant gifts were payments that raised red flags. Large sums of money had been transferred to shell companies with no clear purpose, and investigators suspected these funds were being used to pay off individuals who had been silenced. The records also showed a pattern of withdrawals that coincided with key events, leading prosecutors to argue that Diddy had been buying the silence of his accusers for years.
Even the judge has made mention of not wanting this to be a case sort of built on gossip, but really making sure that these jurors are hearing the meat and potatoes of what we're here for, and that's the criminal enterprise, racketeering, trafficking, and making sure that we're hearing information that somehow lead to all of those things.
One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from a whistleblower within Diddy's own circle. This individual, whose identity was kept anonymous for their safety, provided a sworn affidavit detailing how Diddy had allegedly orchestrated a campaign to discredit his accusers. The affidavit described a network of private investigators, publicists, and even social media influencers who were tasked with spreading false information and attacking the credibility of those who spoke out. The whistleblower also claimed that Diddy had personally approved these tactics, viewing them as a necessary evil to protect his reputation. But perhaps the most chilling revelations came from those who had once considered Diddy a friend. Several former collaborators testified about how their relationships with him had soured, often under mysterious circumstances. One musician described how he had been blacklisted after refusing to participate in one of Diddy's events, while another recounted how she had been pressured to sign a non-disclosure agreement after witnessing something she described as deeply unsettling. These stories painted a picture of a man who didn't just demand loyalty, he enforced it, using fear and intimidation to maintain control. And then there was the public fallout. As more and more allegations came to light, the court of public opinion began to turn against Diddy. Social media was flooded with calls for accountability, with hashtags demanding justice for the alleged victims. But even as the tide seemed to be turning, there were those who questioned whether justice would ever truly be served. After all, Diddy wasn't just a man, he was an institution, a symbol of success and resilience in an industry that often chews people up and spits them out. The question on everyone's mind was whether this institution could be dismantled, or whether it would simply adapt and survive.
A US judge has ruled that the rapper and producer Sean Diddy Combs will stand trial on federal trafficking and racketeering charges in May. He'll be held in prison until then. Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to charges that he used his business empire to transport women and male workers across state lines to take part in recorded performances. If convicted, he could face a life sentence.
As the day's proceedings came to a close, there was a sense of foreboding in the air. The revelations had been shocking, but they felt like just the beginning. What else lay hidden in those files and recordings? How many more people would come forward with their own stories? And most importantly, how far would Diddy go to protect what he had built? The answers were tantalizingly out of reach, but one thing was clear: this story was far from over. Let us know what you think down below. How deep do you think this goes? And who else might be implicated before it's all said and done? Drop your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next one.